Hey guys, each hero in Battlefront 2 has very different blasters and they each play differently. They also have different performances and not every blaster is created equal. So if you've played the game, you probably have an idea of what the best blasters are. Generally, Han and Iden are going to be really good, and then there are weaker blasters like Chewie and Bosk. But I think it's good to know how good all the blasters are and how well they perform at different ranges. So today, I'm testing and comparing the blasters of each Battlefront 2 blaster hero. For this video, I tested the blasters at short range and long range because while some blasters aren't very good up close, they do shine a lot more at long range. For example, up close, Leia's blaster shreds, and Bosk's blaster is pretty weak. Then, when you go to long range, Leia's blaster has a huge drop-off, and Bosk's blaster has no drop-off. So the rules are pretty simple for how I test the damage. I time how long it takes for the blaster to do 400 damage to the body, and how long that time is the time to kill. The actual time is for comparison and doesn't offer any value since your opponent's health and range is going to change every time. Now, before I get into this video, make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video or you think it's good information. And if you're new or you've been watching a couple of my videos, then I would really appreciate it if you guys subscribed. My analytics say most of you guys aren't subscribed, so it would be pretty nice to get those numbers up. You definitely don't have to, it would just be a nice way to help me out. But now let's get into the actual testing of this video. The timing is tested off seconds and frames, so it goes to 1 second then out of 60 frames. So just so you guys know, that's how it works. The first blaster is Leia, who generally has one of the best blasters in the game. She comes in at a quick time of 1 second and 16 frames. Pretty unsurprising there. Next is Han, who also has a great blaster, who has a time of 1 second and 22 frames. Once again, not much surprise, but it is slightly lower than Leia. Chewie, who doesn't really have one of the greatest blasters, comes in at a time of 3 seconds and 6 frames. Chewie's blaster really isn't the best. He has a slow rate of fire and it just doesn't do much damage. Of course, it gets carried pretty hard by Furious Bowcaster, so Chewie's blaster can still shred if you use it right. Next up is Lando, who doesn't generally have the best blaster, but here he comes in with a pretty decent time of 2 seconds and 2 frames. Not the best, but not the worst. Finn, who also has a really good blaster, comes in at a time of 1 second and 40 frames, a pretty significant improvement from Lando, but a bit of a down from still Han and Leia. Now on to Darkseid, the first hero we have is Boba Fett. He has a good E11 and comes in with a time of 1 second and 38 frames, so pretty close to Finn and a bit slower than that Han and Leia area. Then we have Bosk, who has a slower rate of fire, kinda like Chewie, but his blaster still does much better and comes in with a time of 1 second and 48 frames, which is slightly lower than Boba Fett. Next is Iden, who usually has a really good blaster and is one of my favorites in the game. She has a time of 1 second and 36 frames, still not the best, but it's quite good. It's in that average time of 1 second to 40 frames, 1 second 50 frames, where most of the best blasters are. Next is Phasma, who doesn't have the best blaster in the game and comes in of a time of 2 seconds and 14 frames, which is slower than Lando's, and one of the slowest so far. Now we are going to long range. This is a bit difficult for some of the blasters like Leia because it took me multiple tries to hit almost every one of the shots, so it's not going to be a perfect reading, but it is what it is. And Leia, in general, you should not be using this blaster at long range. What you should be using is her secondary fire, but that is slower, so I just tested the regular fire. Here she has a time of 4 seconds and 16 frames, a solid 3 second increase from her original time up close. Next is Han, who has definitely a more long range blaster, and his blaster has little drop off as he has a time of 2 seconds and 8 frames, about half a second slower. So not too long of a drop off. That's about the same time as Lando and Phasma from up close. Next is Chewie, who once again has a slower blaster, but his time comes in at a slower time of exactly 4 seconds. Now, This is definitely not the fastest, but it's not way slower than up close, so he doesn't have a horrible drop off. So his blaster, you can still hit people from pretty long and you're not going to have a massive drop off. But once again, you're seeing much lower numbers than like Han, although the numbers are a little less than Leia. Next is Lando, who once again doesn't have the most long range blaster. So here he is, and I couldn't hit every single shot, but it was pretty good here. He comes in at a time of 3 seconds and 50 frames, better than Leia. Next is Finn, who also, like Han, has a more suited blaster for long range, and his blaster is going to do really good from long range. His blaster has little recoil, and it's just really good for aiming, and so he's the perfect blaster for long range. So he comes in with a quick time of 1 second and 56 frames, which is just slightly slower than his regular time. Next is Boba, who once again is a bit hard to aim from this range with his blaster, but I do a pretty good job here. And he comes in with a more surprising time for me of a time with 2 seconds and 49 frames. I expected there to be more of a drop off. I would have thought otherwise because of his aim, but there you go, you can snipe pretty well with Boba's blaster. Next is Bosk, which of course is kind of a sniper type of rifle, so it's going to do pretty good from long range. But you see this kind of the slow firing rate, so it comes in at a time of 3 seconds and 32 frames, which is definitely not the best. Now, it may have been quicker if I didn't load it up all the way, so I probably shouldn't have loaded it up all the way and just done quicker times. But most of the time from long range, at least for me, I'm going to be trying to load it up and try to hit those headshots. So there, I'm just going to keep the fully loaded up time. Next is Aiden, who once again doesn't have the most long-range blaster, and you know that. She has a secondary weapon, which is good for sniping, but her blaster is surprisingly pretty easy to aim from long range, and she came in with not too long of a time of exactly 3 seconds. Next is Phasma, who once again has a pretty long-range blaster. She comes in with a very short time of 2 seconds and 2 frames, which is actually a shorter time from up close. So her blaster kind of works the opposite of other blasters, where it does more damage from far away. So that was a bit more surprising to me, but you can see here it works really well, and she does a lot of damage. And she has one of the best times in the game right there. Next, I tested BB-8, BB-9E, and Palpatine because why not? They're not saber heroes, they're not exactly blaster heroes, but I thought it would be good to test out their time and see how it compares to most blaster heroes. Obviously, it's going to be slower because they're, smaller and harder to hit, so they don't need the really fast times, and they have really good maneuverability. So BB-8 comes in with a longer time of 5 seconds and 20 frames, which is pretty long, and then BB-9E comes in with exactly the same time of 5 seconds and 20 frames. But BB-9E's attack is a bit better since BB-9E does have the stun to it. And finally, I have Palpatine. I wanted to test his damage against the regular blasters. And his time, which isn't too surprising, since once again, he has more maneuverability and harder to hit than most regular blasters. He comes in a time of 3 seconds and 16 frames, which is pretty slow, but not the worst out there. So there you have it. That is the time and rankings of all blaster heroes in Battlefront 2 and some non-blaster heroes. On the screen now, you can see the final rankings of all my testing, and you can see how well they did. Of course, I tested this in arcade, so I don't know if the exact results will translate perfectly over to multiplayer, but they definitely should be correct, and if they are off, they might be slightly off. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.